The blizzard hit without warning, turning the Arizona high country into a white hell that swallowed everything in its path. And somewhere in that frozen chaos, a woman was dying. Finnegan Irving had been tracking a runaway steer for the better part of 3 hours when the storm rolled over the mountains like an avalanche of ice and fury. He had lived in the Arizona territory long enough to know that winter in the high elevations could be deadly, even if most folks back east thought of the place as nothing but desert and heat. Up here in the mountains northeast of Fort McDowell, where the elevation climbed above 7,000 feet, winter could kill you just as dead as any bullet. The year was 1884, and Finnegan had spent the last 6 years working cattle across some of the roughest country God ever created. At 26, he was lean and weathered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He had come west after his father died, leaving behind a failing farm in Missouri and a mother who remarried within the year. The West had given him purpose, even if that purpose was just surviving one day to the next. The wind howled through the pines, driving snow so thick he could barely see his horse's ears. Thunder, his big roan gelding, picked his way carefully through the drifts, sensing his rider's tension. Finnegan pulled his hat down lower and wrapped his scarf tighter around his face, knowing he needed to find shelter soon or risk freezing to death himself. That was when Thunder stopped dead, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. "What is it, boy?" Finnegan's words were snatched away by the wind, but he trusted his horse's instincts more than his own half-frozen senses. He squinted through the driving snow, seeing nothing but white on white, the dark shapes of pines emerging and disappearing like ghosts. Thunder whinnied, the sound sharp with alarm, and took 2 steps to the right without being asked. Finnegan let him have his head, and that was when he saw it. A dark shape in the snow, too still to be anything living, but the wrong size and shape to be a fallen log or rock. His heart kicked hard against his ribs as he dismounted, his boots sinking into snow up to his knees. He stumbled forward, and the shape resolved itself into something that made his blood run cold. A woman lay face down in the snow. Her dark riding dress spread around her like wings, her auburn hair spilling across the white powder like blood. No horse in sight, no movement, nothing but that terribly still form half buried in the drift. Finnegan dropped to his knees beside her, his frozen fingers fumbling as he turned her over as gently as he could. Her face was pale as death, lips tinged blue, eyes closed. Snow clung to her eyelashes and had begun to collect in the hollow of her throat. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with fine features and a straight nose that was currently the color of ice. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat, praying for a pulse, and nearly sobbed with relief when he felt the faint flutter of life beneath her cold skin. She was alive, but she would not be for long if he did not get her warm. "Come on, lady, stay with me," he muttered, though he knew she could not hear him. He looked around desperately, trying to get his bearings in the whiteout conditions. They were maybe 2 miles from the line shack he had passed earlier, a small shelter the ranch used during roundups and bad weather. It might as well have been 200 miles in this storm, but it was their only chance. Finnegan struggled to his feet, the woman limp in his arms. She was heavier than she looked, all that wet wool holding water like a sponge, but he was strong from years of ranch work. He managed to drape her over Thunder's saddle, then pulled himself up behind her, arranging her as best he could to keep her from sliding off. Thunder did not like carrying double in the storm, but he was a good horse and understood urgency. Finnegan kept one arm wrapped tight around the woman's waist, holding her against his chest, trying to share what little body heat he had left. She was so cold she might have been carved from ice, and he could not tell if she was still breathing. The ride to the line shack was a nightmare of white and cold, every minute stretching into an eternity. Finnegan talked to Thunder constantly, more to keep himself conscious than to guide the horse, trusting the roan to find his way. His legs were numb, his face felt like it had been carved from wood, and his arms burned with the effort of holding the woman secure. When the dark shape of the line shack finally emerged from the storm, Finnegan almost wept with relief. He half fell from the saddle, dragging the woman down with him, and stumbled through the snow to the door. It was latched but not locked, and he managed to get it open with his shoulder, spilling them both into the relative warmth of the small cabin. It was not much warmer inside than out, but at least they were out of the wind. Finnegan kicked the door shut and carried the woman to the narrow bunk against the far wall. He laid her down as gently as his shaking hands would allow, then turned to the potbelly stove in the corner. Thank God for small mercies. There was wood stacked beside the stove, and kindling in a box nailed to the wall. His fingers were so numb he could barely strike a match, but on the third try he got a flame, and soon had a fire crackling to life. The heat felt like heaven against his frozen face, but he could not afford to stand there and bask in it. The woman on the bunk was still unconscious, still dangerously cold. He turned back to her, assessing the situation with as much clarity as his exhausted mind could muster. Her clothes were soaked through, which meant they had to come off. The thought made him uncomfortable, but propriety was a luxury they could not afford. If he did not get her warm and dry, she would die. Working as quickly as his frozen fingers would allow, Finnegan unbuttoned her riding jacket and peeled it off her limp arms. Underneath she wore a white shirtwaist, also soaked, and a corset that he had to cut the laces on because his fingers could not manage the knots. He tried to keep his eyes averted as he worked, focusing on the task as if she were an injured calf he was doctoring, but he could not help noticing that she was beautiful, even half frozen and unconscious. He stripped her down to her chemise, which was damp but not soaked, and decided that was decent enough. Her skirts and petticoats went next, leaving her in the chemise and her drawers. He wrapped her in every blanket he could find in the cabin, which was only 3, thin and moth-eaten, but better than nothing. While she lay cocooned on the bunk, Finnegan went back out into the storm to tend Thunder. The horse needed shelter too, and there was a small lean-to attached to the side of the cabin. He unsaddled the roan, rubbed him down as best he could with a piece of burlap he found hanging from a nail, and left him with a pile of the prairie grass hay that had been stored in the corner of the shed. It was not much, but Thunder would survive the night. Back inside the cabin, Finnegan stripped off his own wet coat and boots, hanging them near the stove to dry. The fire was going strong now, filling the small space with blessed heat. He checked the woman again, feeling for her pulse, relieved when he found it stronger than before, though still faint. "Come on, lady," he said softly, rubbing her hands between his, trying to warm them. "Do not die on me now. You have come too far to give up." She did not respond, did not even flutter an eyelash, but her skin was starting to feel warmer under his touch. That had to be a good sign. He knew the dangers of freezing, knew that sometimes people seemed to get better only to die hours later when their heart gave out, but he pushed those thoughts away. She would live. She had to live. He spent the next hour tending the fire and checking on her every few minutes, watching for any sign of consciousness. As the cabin warmed and his own body thawed, exhaustion hit him like a falling tree. He had been up since before dawn, had ridden through a blizzard, and had nearly frozen to death himself. But he could not sleep, not while she was still unconscious, not while her life still hung in the balance. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bunk, keeping watch, and wondered who she was. Her riding habit had been expensive, well-tailored, the kind of thing a rancher's daughter or a merchant's wife might wear. She wore no wedding ring, but that did not mean much. She could have lost it in the snow, or maybe she did not hold with wearing jewelry. Her hands were soft, not the work, roughened hands of a woman who did her own washing and cooking, which meant she came from money. What was a woman like that doing out alone in the high country in winter? No woman with any sense rode out in weather like this without an escort, without someone to watch over her. Had she been running from something, or just foolish enough to think she could outride the storm? The questions circled in his tired mind like buzzards, but he had no answers. All he could do was keep her alive and hope she woke up soon enough to tell him herself. It was well past midnight when her eyes finally opened. Finnegan had dozed off sitting on the floor beside the bunk, his back against the wall, when a soft sound made him jerk awake. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and for a moment he was disoriented, not sure where he was or what had woken him. Then he saw her eyes, wide and frightened in the firelight, staring at him like he was a ghost. "Easy," he said softly, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "You are safe. You are all right." She tried to sit up, but her body was not ready for it, and she fell back against the thin pillow with a gasp. Her hand came up to her head, and she winced. "What happened? Where am I?" Her voice was rough, barely more than a whisper, but there was education in it, refinement that confirmed his guess about her background. "You fell from your horse in the blizzard," Finnegan said, keeping his voice calm and even. "I found you unconscious in the snow about 2 miles from here. This is a line shack on the Triple Bar Ranch. My name is Finnegan Irving. I work for the outfit that runs cattle up here." She stared at him, trying to process his words, her eyes moving around the cabin as if cataloging every detail. When her gaze dropped to her own body, wrapped in blankets, wearing only her undergarments, her cheeks flushed pink despite the cold. "My clothes," she whispered, her hand clutching the blanket to her chest. "We're soaked through," Finnegan said quickly, looking away to give her some privacy. "I had to get them off you, or you would have frozen to death. They are drying by the stove. I did not, I was respectful. I only did what I had to do to save your life." The silence stretched between them, tense and awkward, and Finnegan wished he had a better way with words. He had never been good at talking to women, especially not women like this, women who came from a different world than his rough and tumble existence. "I understand," she said finally, her voice still weak but steadier now. "Thank you for saving my life." He nodded, still not looking at her directly. "What is your name? Where were you headed?" She was quiet for so long he thought maybe she had passed out again, but when he glanced over he saw her staring at the ceiling, her expression distant. "Zara Sinclair," she said at last. "I was riding from Fort McDowell to the Anderson Ranch. My father owns the mercantile in town. I was supposed to deliver some supplies to the Andersons, but the storm came up so fast and my horse spooked. I do not know what happened to him. I remember falling, hitting my head, and then nothing until I woke up just now." Finnegan frowned. "You rode out alone? In winter? That is a 30-mile ride, Miss Sinclair." "I know it was foolish," she said, and there was a note of defensiveness in her voice now, some of the strength returning. "But my father's employee who was supposed to make the delivery took sick, and the Andersons needed the medicine we were bringing. Mrs. Anderson has been poorly, and they live too far from town to send for the doctor easily. I thought I could make it before the storm hit. I was wrong." He could not argue with that, so he just nodded. "Well, you are alive, and that is what matters. The storm is still going strong outside, so we are stuck here until it passes. Might be a day or two. There is some food here, beans and coffee and some hardtack, not much, but it will keep us from starving." Zara closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought he saw tears on her lashes, but she blinked them away quickly. "My father will be worried sick. He will think I am dead." "I am sorry," Finnegan said, and he meant it. "But there is nothing we can do until the storm breaks. Trying to ride out in this would be suicide." She nodded, swallowing hard, and he could see her fighting to keep her composure. She was stronger than she looked, this merchant's daughter with her soft hands and refined speech. Not many women would have held together so well after nearly freezing to death. "Try to rest," he said gently. "You are still weak. Sleep will do you good." "What about you?" she asked, her eyes finding his in the firelight. They were green, he noticed, a deep green like the pines outside. "You must be exhausted too." "I will be fine," he lied, though every bone in his body ached with exhaustion. "I will keep the fire going." She studied him for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she could see right through his lie. But she did not call him on it, just nodded and closed her eyes. Finnegan added more wood to the fire and settled back against the wall, wrapping his arms around his knees. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the walls of the small cabin, but inside it was warm and dry, and they were both alive. For tonight, that was enough. He must have dozed off again, because when he opened his eyes, pale gray light was filtering through the cracks in the shutters. The storm was still raging outside, but it sounded less fierce than it had during the night. Finnegan stood, his back protesting the long hours on the hard floor, and checked on Zara. She was sleeping soundly, her breathing even and deep, her color better than it had been. Her auburn hair had dried while she slept, spreading across the pillow in waves that caught the firelight like copper. She was, he realized, with an uncomfortable twist in his chest, one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen. He looked away quickly, feeling like he was intruding on something private, and busied himself with making coffee. The small stove could heat water as well as warm the cabin, and he filled the battered pot from the bucket of snow he had brought inside the night before. It melted quickly, and soon the smell of coffee filled the cabin. Zara woke to the sound of him moving around, her eyes opening slowly, confusion crossing her face before memory returned. She sat up carefully, holding the blanket around herself, and looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Good morning," she said, her voice hoarse. "Morning," he replied, handing her a tin cup of coffee. "It is not much, but it is hot." She took it gratefully, wrapping both hands around the cup and breathing in the steam. "It smells wonderful, thank you." They sat in silence for a while, drinking their coffee, the awkwardness of the situation settling around them like a third presence in the cabin. Finnegan kept his eyes on the fire, acutely aware of her sitting on the bunk, in nothing but her undergarments and a blanket, acutely aware of how small the cabin was and how alone they were. "Your clothes should be dry enough to wear now," he said finally, standing to check the garments hanging near the stove. The wool riding habit was still damp in places, but it would do. He handed the bundle to her, carefully not looking, and turned his back to give her privacy. He heard the rustle of fabric, the soft sounds of her dressing, and kept his eyes fixed firmly on the wall. When she spoke again, he turned to find her fully dressed, though her hair was still down around her shoulders instead of pinned up properly. Without the corset, which he had ruined when he cut the laces, her dress fit differently, but she had managed to make herself decent. "I must look a fright," she said with a weak smile, trying to smooth her hair with her fingers. "You look alive," Finnegan said honestly. "That is all that matters." Her smile widened a little, and for the first time he saw the woman beneath the fear and exhaustion. She had a good smile, warm and genuine, when it reached her eyes. The day passed slowly, the storm keeping them trapped inside the small cabin. Finnegan rationed out the beans and hardtack, wishing he had something better to offer her, but Zara ate without complaint. They talked in fits and starts, the conversation awkward at first but growing easier as the hours wore on. He learned that she was 23 years old, that she had come to Fort McDowell 2 years ago with her father after her mother died back in St. Louis. Her father, William Sinclair, had decided a fresh start out west would do them both good, and he had used his savings to buy the mercantile. It had been hard at first, Zara admitted, adjusting to life in a rough frontier town after the relative civilization of Missouri, but she had grown to love the wild beauty of the territory. "I had never seen mountains like these until we came here," she said, staring at the shuttered window as if she could see through it to the peaks beyond. "They are terrifying and magnificent all at once. I understand why people come west, why they risk everything for a chance at this kind of freedom." Finnegan found himself telling her things he rarely spoke about his own journey west, about the father who drank himself to death, and the mother who could not wait to replace him, about the years of drifting from ranch to ranch, working cattle and breaking horses, never quite finding a place to call home. "Do you ever want to settle down?" Zara asked, her green eyes curious. "Buy your own land? Build something permanent?" He shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "Maybe someday. Right now, I just try to make it through each season. Cattle ranching is hard work, and the pay is not much. Saving enough to buy land takes time. But you would like to, if you could? I suppose, he admitted. It would be nice to have something that was mine, something I built with my own hands. But wanting and having are two different things. She nodded thoughtfully, and he had the sense that she understood more than he had said, that she could read between the lines of his careful words. That night, as the storm finally began to ease, Finnegan insisted that Zara take the bunk again, while he made himself as comfortable as possible on the floor. She protested, saying he had already given up the bed the night before, but he would not budge. "You nearly died yesterday," he said firmly. "You need proper rest. I have slept in worse places than this, believe me." She finally relented, and he lay down on the hard floor with his saddle as a pillow, listening to her breathing slow and deepen as she fell asleep. His own sleep was harder to come by, his mind too full of thoughts he could not quite name, feelings he did not want to examine too closely. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world outside blanketed in white. Finnegan saddled Thunder and helped Zara up behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. The ride back to Fort McDowell would take most of the day, even with the weather clear, and they needed to get started. The journey was long and cold, but the sun was shining and the sky was that brilliant blue that only comes after a storm. Thunder picked his way carefully through the deep snow, and Finnegan was acutely aware of Zara pressed against his back, her breath warm against his neck despite the cold air. They stopped once at midday to rest the horse and eat the last of the hardtack. Zara's cheeks were flushed with cold, her nose red, but she was smiling, her eyes bright. "I never thought I would be so happy to see the sun," she said, tilting her face up to catch the weak winter light. "Yesterday I thought I was going to die in that storm." "You almost did," Finnegan said quietly. "Another hour, and I would not have found you in time." She looked at him, and something passed between them, something electric and unspoken. "But you did find me. That has to mean something." He did not know what to say to that, so he just helped her back onto the horse and they continued on. It was late afternoon when they finally rode into Fort McDowell, and Finnegan could see the relief on Zara's face as the familiar buildings came into view. The town was small, just a few dozen structures clustered around a central street. But it was civilization after 2 days in the wilderness. The mercantile was easy to spot, and Finnegan reined Thunder to a stop in front of it. Before Zara could dismount, the door flew open and a man came rushing out, his face a mask of relief and fear. "Zara! Oh, thank God, Zara!" William Sinclair was a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years of hard work. He pulled his daughter off the horse and into his arms, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. "I thought you were dead. When the storm hit and you did not come back, I thought the worst." "I am fine, Father," Zara said, her voice muffled against his chest. "This man saved my life. Finnegan Irving. He found me in the snow and got me to shelter." William Sinclair turned to Finnegan, his eyes bright with unshed tears, and held out his hand. "I owe you a debt I can never repay, Mr. Irving. My daughter is everything to me. If she had died out there, I do not know what I would have done." Finnegan shook his hand, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I only did what anyone would have done, sir. I'm just glad I found her when I did." "Nonsense," William said firmly. "Not everyone would have risked their own life in a blizzard like that. You are a hero, Mr. Irving, and I will not hear otherwise. Please, come inside. Let me at least offer you a hot meal and a place to sleep tonight. It is the least I can do." Finnegan wanted to refuse, to ride back to the Triple Bar and put this whole strange episode behind him, but something in Zara's eyes made him hesitate. She was looking at him with an expression he could not quite read, something hopeful and uncertain all at once. "I suppose I could stay for a meal," he heard himself say. "Thunder could use some rest before I head back to the ranch." William's face lit up, and he ushered them both inside, calling for someone to tend to the horse. The mercantile was warm and well stocked, and living quarters were attached to the back. William's housekeeper, a Mexican woman named Rosa, clucked over Zara like a mother hen and disappeared into the kitchen to prepare food. Finnegan found himself sitting at a table in the Sinclairs' small but comfortable parlor, a cup of real coffee in his hands, while William asked him question after question about the rescue. Zara had gone to change into dry clothes, and Finnegan tried not to think about her in the room above his head, tried not to remember the feel of her arms around his waist as they rode. When she came back down, she was wearing a simple dress of dark blue wool, her hair pinned up properly now, and Finnegan felt his breath catch in his chest. In the warm light of the parlor, with color in her cheeks and a smile on her lips, she was so beautiful it almost hurt to look at her. Dinner was a feast compared to the beans and hardtack they had been surviving on. Rosa had prepared a roast with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread, and even a pie for dessert. Finnegan ate until he thought he might burst, listening to William tell stories about building the mercantile and learning to do business in a frontier town. It was not easy at first, William admitted, pouring them all coffee after the meal. People out here are suspicious of outsiders, and they had their established suppliers. But we worked hard, kept our prices fair, and eventually they came to trust us. Now we do a good business. Not as much as I made back in St. Louis, maybe, but enough to live comfortably. Father has built something important here, Zara said, pride evident in her voice. He supplies half the ranches in the territory, and he extends credit to families who are struggling. He believes in helping people, not just making a profit. William waved away the praise, but Finnegan could see the pleasure in his eyes. We do what we can. This is a hard land, and people need to help each other if they're going to survive. As the evening wore on, Finnegan found himself relaxing in a way he had not in years. The Sinclairs' home was warm and welcoming, filled with books and comfortable furniture and the smell of good cooking. It reminded him of something he had not had since his father died, something he had not realized he missed until now: family, home, belonging. When William finally insisted he stay the night in their spare room rather than ride back to the ranch in the dark, Finnegan accepted, telling himself it was just because it made practical sense, not because he wanted to spend more time in Zara's company. But later, as he lay in a real bed for the first time in months, clean sheets and a soft pillow under his head, he could not stop thinking about the woman sleeping somewhere in the house above him. Could not stop remembering the feel of her in his arms, the trust in her eyes when she woke up in the cabin. He had saved her life, but something told him she might have saved his too, though he could not quite explain how. The next morning, Finnegan woke to the smell of bacon frying and fresh coffee brewing. He dressed quickly and made his way downstairs to find the kitchen table set for 3. Zara was helping Rosa with the cooking, and the sight of her in a simple apron, her hair caught up in a casual bun, made something twist pleasantly in his chest. "Good morning," she said, smiling at him over her shoulder. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in a long time," he admitted, taking the seat William indicated. "Thank you again for your hospitality, Mr. Sinclair. I should be heading back to the ranch soon. They will be wondering what happened to me." Of course," William said, but there was a thoughtful look in his eyes. "Though I hope you will come back to visit us when you are in town. As I said, I owe you a debt I can never fully repay. The least I can do is offer you a home-cooked meal whenever you need one." "I would like that," Finnegan said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. Breakfast was another generous meal, and by the time Finnegan finally took his leave, it was mid-morning. Zara walked him out to where Thunder was waiting, freshly fed and groomed by one of William's employees. "Thank you again," she said softly, standing close enough that he could smell the lavender scent of her soap. "For everything. I know I already said it, but I do not think I can say it enough. You saved my life, Finnegan Irving." "I am just glad I was there," he replied, looking down at her upturned face. "You take care of yourself, Miss Sinclair. No more riding out alone in winter storms." She laughed, the sound like music. "I promise. I learned my lesson." He swung up into the saddle, suddenly reluctant to leave, though he could not have said why. She stood there looking up at him, one hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun, and he had the strangest urge to stay, to find any excuse to linger in her presence just a little longer. "I suppose I will see you around town," he said awkwardly. I hope so, she replied, and there was something in her voice that made his heart beat faster. The ride back to the Triple Bar Ranch gave Finnegan plenty of time to think, and he found his thoughts circling back to Zara again and again. He told himself he was being foolish, that she was a merchant's daughter and he was just a hired hand, that they came from different worlds and had no future together. But he could not stop thinking about her smile, about the way she had felt in his arms, about the connection he had felt between them during those long hours trapped in the line shack. When he finally reached the ranch, the foreman, a gruff man named Carson, took one look at him and shook his head. We were about to send out a search party, Carson said, relief evident beneath his gruff tone. Where the hell have you been, Irving? Finnegan explained about the storm and finding Zara, leaving out most of the personal details. Carson listened, nodding, and when the story was done, he clapped Finnegan on the shoulder. You did good, son, real good. Woman would have died out there if not for you. Just lucky I found her when I did, Finnegan said, uncomfortable with the praise. Luck nothing. You got good instincts and a good horse. That is what saved her. The next few weeks fell into a familiar rhythm of work. Finnegan rode fence lines, checked on cattle, helped with the endless repairs that winter demanded on a working ranch. But no matter how hard he worked, how tired he was at the end of each day, he could not stop thinking about Zara Sinclair. He found excuses to ride into Fort McDowell more often than usual, telling himself he needed supplies or wanted a drink at the saloon, but somehow he always ended up walking past the mercantile, and more often than not, Zara would be there, helping a customer or arranging stock on the shelves. She always smiled when she saw him, always took time to talk, and slowly, tentatively, they began to build something that felt like friendship. He learned that she loved to read, that she missed the theater and museums of St. Louis but had come to appreciate the stark beauty of the Arizona mountains. She told him about her mother who had died of pneumonia the winter before they moved west, and how her father had never quite recovered from the loss. In turn, he told her things he had never told anyone, about his dreams of owning his own land someday, about the loneliness that sometimes threatened to swallow him whole, about the feeling that he was always searching for something he could not quite name. Maybe you will find it someday, she said one afternoon in late February, when winter was finally starting to loosen its grip on the high country. They were sitting on the bench outside the mercantile watching the townspeople go about their business. The thing you are looking for. Maybe, he said, looking at her profile, the way the afternoon sun caught in her hair. Or maybe I already found it and just do not know it yet. She turned to look at him, and for a long moment they just stared at each other, the world around them fading away. He saw the exact moment she understood what he meant, saw her eyes widen and her lips part in surprise. Finnegan, she whispered. But whatever she was going to say was interrupted by a customer calling from inside the store. The moment broke, and she stood quickly smoothing her skirts. I should go. Father needs help with inventory. He watched her disappear inside, his heart hammering in his chest, wondering if he had just ruined everything or started something new. That night, lying in his bunk in the ranch bunkhouse, Finnegan made a decision. He was tired of drifting, tired of never having anything that was his. If he wanted a future with Zara Sinclair, and he was starting to realize that he did desperately, then he needed to become the kind of man who could offer her something. He needed his own land, his own future to build. The next morning, he asked Carson for a private word and explained what he wanted. The foreman listened, nodding slowly, and when Finnegan was done, Carson leaned back in his chair and studied him with shrewd eyes. You want to homestead? Carson said. That is hard work, Irving. Harder than anything you have done here. I know, Finnegan said, but I am willing to do it. I've been saving my wages, and I have enough to file a claim and buy some basic supplies. I just need to find the right piece of land. Carson was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. There is a valley about 10 miles north of here, good water and decent grazing. It is not claimed yet, far as I know. The Triple Bar does not have rights to it, and it is too remote for most folks to bother with. But if you are willing to work hard, you could make something of it. Hope flared in Finnegan's chest. Will you show me? I will do better than that, Carson said, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. I will help you file the claim and get set up. You have been a good hand, Irving, one of the best. You deserve a chance at something of your own. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Carson took him to see the valley, and Finnegan knew immediately it was perfect. A creek ran through it year-round, fed by springs in the mountains above. There were stands of pine for lumber, open meadows for grazing, and the soil looked decent for growing hay and vegetables. He filed his homestead claim at the land office, paying the small fee and signing all the necessary papers. According to the Homestead Act, he had to live on the land for 5 years and make improvements to it before he could own it outright. 5 years seemed like forever, but it also felt like a future worth working toward. With the help of some of the other ranch hands, he began building a small cabin on his claim. It was rough work, cutting and hauling logs, notching them to fit together, building a roof that would keep out the rain and snow. But it was his work, his cabin, his future, and that made every aching muscle worth it. He did not tell Zara what he was doing at first, wanting to have something concrete to show her before he spoke. But keeping it secret became harder every time he saw her, every time she smiled at him or touched his arm while they talked. Finally, in mid-March, when the cabin was finished and the worst of winter was behind them, he rode into Fort McDowell with his heart in his throat and asked if she would take a ride with him. She looked surprised but pleased, and after getting her father's permission, she changed into her riding habit and met him outside. This time she had her own horse, a pretty bay mare named Sage, and they rode out of town side by side. "Where are we going?" she asked, curiosity bright in her green eyes. "I want to show you something," was all he would say. The ride to his valley took a little over an hour, and Finnegan watched Zara's face as they crested the rise, and the land opened up before them. He saw her eyes widen, saw the smile spread across her face. "It is beautiful," she breathed, taking in the meadow with its carpet of early wildflowers, the creek sparkling in the sun, the mountains rising majestically in the distance. "It is mine," Finnegan said quietly. "I filed a homestead claim on it. That cabin there, I built it myself with some help from the boys at the Triple Bar. It is not much yet, but it is a start." Zara turned to stare at him, and he could not read the expression on her face. "You are homesteading? But why? I thought you liked working for the Triple Bar." I do," he corrected. "But I wanted something of my own, something permanent, a future I could build with my own hands." She was quiet for a long moment, and he felt his heart sinking, wondering if he had misread everything, if she did not feel what he felt. Then she said very softly, "Is this future something you plan to build alone?" He looked at her, and the hope in her eyes made his breath catch. "I was hoping it might be something I could build with someone else, if she was willing." "And who might this someone be?" Zara asked, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth now. Instead of answering with words, Finnegan dismounted and walked to her horse, reaching up to help her down. She came into his arms easily, naturally, and for a moment they just stood there, close enough that he could feel her breath on his face. "You, Zara," he said roughly. "It has always been you, since the moment I found you in that snow. Maybe before that, maybe since before I even knew you existed. I do not have much to offer, just this land and this cabin and a lot of hard work ahead. But if you would have me, if you think you could be happy here, then I would spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling so wide it lit up her whole face. "I thought you were never going to ask. I've been waiting, hoping, praying that you felt the same way I did. Yes, Finnegan Irving, yes, I will have you. Yes, I will build this future with you." He kissed her then finally, after weeks of wanting to, and it was everything he had imagined and more. She tasted like spring and hope and all the good things he had stopped believing in. And when they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, he felt like the luckiest man alive. "I will have to ask your father's permission properly," he said, already dreading that conversation. "I have nothing but this land and my name. He might say no." "He will say yes," Zara said confidently, taking his hand and lacing her fingers through his. "He already likes you. He has told me more than once that you are a good man, the kind of man he hoped I would find out here. And he trusts my judgment." She was right. When Finnegan sat down with William Sinclair that evening and asked for his daughter's hand in marriage, the older man smiled and shook his hand firmly. "I was wondering when you would get around to it," William said, his eyes twinkling. "Zara has been walking around with her head in the clouds for weeks now. I knew it was only a matter of time." They were married in late April, when the wildflowers were in full bloom and the weather had turned warm and sweet. It was a simple ceremony in the small church in Fort McDowell, with half the town in attendance. Finnegan wore his best clothes, which were not much, but Zara looked like an angel in a white dress her father had ordered special from St. Louis. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Finnegan kissed her in front of God and everyone, and did not care who saw the tears on his cheeks. The first year of their marriage was hard work but filled with joy. They lived in the small cabin, and every day they worked side by side to improve their homestead. Finnegan cleared more land for grazing and planted hay in the meadow. Zara started a vegetable garden and sewed curtains for the windows and made the rough cabin into a home. William helped them get started with a small herd of cattle, a wedding gift that made Finnegan's throat tight with gratitude. With careful management and a lot of hard work, they were able to increase the herd over the next few years. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that killed their crops and winters that were brutally cold. There were times when money was tight and times when Finnegan wondered if they would make it. But through it all, Zara was by his side, working as hard as he did, never complaining, always believing in their future. In the spring of their second year, Zara told him she was expecting a baby. Finnegan was terrified and elated in equal measure, remembering his own rough childhood and praying he could be a better father than his own had been. Their son was born in December of 1886 during a rare warm spell that made Finnegan feel like the weather itself was blessing their child. They named him Thomas, after Finnegan's father, hoping to honor what had been good in the man while leaving behind what had been broken. Holding his son for the first time, feeling the tiny weight of him in his arms, Finnegan felt something inside him that had been hard and closed for so long finally crack open. This was what he had been searching for all those years. This was home. Zara was a natural mother, patient and loving, and watching her with their son made Finnegan fall in love with her all over again every single day. She sang to Thomas while she worked, teaching him little songs from her childhood, and Finnegan would stop whatever he was doing just to listen to the sound of her voice. As Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler and then a young boy, the homestead grew too. Finnegan built a larger house to replace the cabin, a real house with separate bedrooms and a proper kitchen. He fenced more pasture and increased their herd until they had a respectable little ranch. It would never be as large as the Triple Bar, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and hearts. In the summer of 1889, when Thomas was 2.5, Zara told Finnegan she was pregnant again. This time he was less terrified and more excited, already imagining Thomas with a little brother or sister to play with. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1890, and they named her Mary after Zara's mother. She had her mother's auburn hair and green eyes, and from the moment she could smile, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. William Sinclair was a fixture at their home, riding out from town at least once a week to visit his grandchildren. He had slowed down some, letting others run more of the day-to-day operations of the mercantile, but he was still sharp and engaged with life. Watching him bounce Mary on his knee while Thomas showed him the new calf they had just that morning, Finnegan felt grateful beyond words for the family he had found. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and hard work and deep contentment. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the animals and had a natural way with horses. Mary was a whirlwind of energy and laughter, always into something, keeping both her parents on their toes. In 1893, Finnegan was finally able to prove up on his homestead claim, having lived on the land and improved it for the required 5 years. The land was his now, truly his, And on the day he received the deed, he and Zara celebrated by dancing in the kitchen while the children laughed and clapped. "We did it," Zara said, her arms around his neck, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "We really did it, Finn." "We did," he agreed, using the nickname only she was allowed to call him. "And none of it would have been possible without you. You are my partner in everything, Zara. My best friend, my love, my whole world." She kissed him then, sweet and lingering, and he thought about how close he had come to losing her that day in the blizzard all those years ago. How different his life would have been if thunder had not stopped, if he had ridden past that drift of snow without seeing what lay beneath. But he had found her. He had saved her life, and in doing so, she had saved his right back. More years passed, each one bringing its own challenges and blessings. In 1895, they welcomed another son, whom they named William after Zara's father. The older William, now in his 60s, was touched beyond words and spoiled his namesake even more than he had the older children. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Finnegan hired a few hands to help with the work, men who reminded him of himself when he was younger, drifting and looking for a place to belong. He tried to be the kind of boss Carson had been to him, fair and firm but understanding. Thomas, now 9 years old, was already helping with the cattle, sitting a horse as naturally as if he had been born in the saddle. Mary, at 5, was more interested in helping her mother in the garden and learning to cook, though she also loved to ride, and could sometimes be found racing her horse across the meadow, her red hair flying behind her like a banner. Little William, they called him Billy to avoid confusion, was 2 years old and into everything, a perfect blend of his older siblings' personalities. Life was full and rich, and everything Finnegan had never dared to dream of when he was a lonely cowhand drifting from ranch to ranch. In the fall of 1897, William Sinclair died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. It was a devastating loss for Zara, who had been so close to her father, and Finnegan held her through her grief, letting her cry on his shoulder as much as she needed. They buried William in the small cemetery outside Fort McDowell, and half the town turned out for the funeral. William had been a beloved figure in the community, known for his generosity and fair dealing, and his loss was felt by everyone. After the funeral, Zara inherited the mercantile, though she had no desire to run it herself. She sold it to the family who had been managing it for the last few years, using the money to expand their ranch and ensure their children would have a secure future. "Father would have wanted this," she said to Finnegan one night as they sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over the mountains. "He always said family was the most important thing. He would be happy knowing this money is going to build something lasting for our children." Finnegan pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "He was proud of you, Zara. Proud of everything you have accomplished. I know he was." She nodded against his shoulder. "I hope so. I hope he knew how much I loved him." "He knew," Finnegan assured her. "A man would have to be blind not to see how much you cared." As the 19th century drew to a close, Finnegan and Zara found themselves entering middle age with their family around them and their future secure. Thomas was now 13 and already talking about expanding the ranch further into the high country. Mary, at 9, had developed a love of books to rival her mother's and spent hours reading anything she could get her hands on. Billy, at 6, was the wild one, always climbing something or chasing something or generally causing mischief. In 1899, Zara surprised Finnegan by telling him she was pregnant again. They were both 41 years old now, and he had assumed their family was complete, but she was radiant with joy at the prospect of another baby, and he found himself excited as well. Their last child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in early 1900. Right at the turn of the new century, she was a beautiful baby, with dark hair like her father and the same gray eyes. Finnegan held her on the morning of her birth and marveled at the fact that he was a father of 4, that this tiny person was the culmination of everything he and Zara had built together. The years that followed were peaceful and prosperous. The ranch was now one of the most successful in the territory, and Finnegan had become a respected member of the community. He served on the town council and helped mediate disputes between ranchers using the wisdom he had gained from years of hard work and careful living. Zara was the heart of their home, keeping everything running smoothly, raising their children with a perfect balance of discipline and love. She also became involved in efforts to bring better education to the region, helping to establish a proper school in Fort McDowell so children did not have to travel long distances for learning. Thomas grew into a fine young man, taking on more and more responsibility at the ranch. When he was 18, he announced his intention to marry a neighbor girl named Sarah, and Finnegan and Zara gave their blessing gladly. The wedding was held at the ranch, and seeing his oldest son start his own family filled Finnegan with a bittersweet pride. Mary, at 14, was showing signs of wanting something beyond ranch life. She talked about becoming a teacher, maybe even going east to a women's college. It terrified Finnegan to think of her so far away, but Zara reminded him gently that they had to let their children find their own paths. "We cannot keep them here just because we want them close," she said one night as they prepared for bed. "They have to follow their own dreams just like we followed ours." "I know," Finnegan admitted, "but it is hard. I want to protect them from everything." "You have protected them," Zara said, turning to face him with that gentle smile that still made his heart skip. "You have given them the best possible start in life. Now we have to trust that they will make good choices." She was right, as she so often was. And when Mary did eventually leave for college in California in 1905, Finnegan was proud even through his sadness. His daughter was smart and capable and determined to make a difference in the world. He could not ask for more than that. Billy proved to have his father's talent with horses and started a business breaking and training horses for other ranchers. By the time he was 20, he had a reputation throughout the territory as one of the best horse trainers around. Finnegan watched him work with a difficult colt one afternoon and felt a deep satisfaction. His children had grown up with opportunities he never had, but they had not been spoiled by it. They knew the value of hard work and integrity. Rose, their youngest, was a bright and curious child who loved following her mother around and learning everything she could about running a household. At 8 years old, she was already helping Zara with the cooking and garden work, asking a million questions about everything. In 1908, when Finnegan was 50 years old and Zara was 49, they celebrated their 24th wedding anniversary. The ranch was thriving. Their children were happy and successful, and they had built exactly the kind of life Finnegan had dreamed of all those years ago when he was a lonely cowhand with nothing to his name. That evening, they rode out together to the place where the old cabin still stood, weathered but intact. Finnegan had kept it maintained as a reminder of where they started, and sometimes they came here just to remember. They sat on the porch of the cabin watching the sun set over the valley, their valley, the land they had claimed and tamed and made into something beautiful. "Do you ever think about that day?" Zara asked softly, her hand in his. "The day you found me in the snow?" "All the time," Finnegan admitted. "I think about how close I came to riding right past you, how different everything would have been if thunder had not stopped." "I think about it too," she said. "I think about how I was so sure I was going to die, and then I woke up and you were there, my guardian angel in the form of a cowboy." He laughed at that. "I am no angel, Zara, just a man who got very, very lucky." "We both got lucky," she corrected, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We found each other in the middle of a blizzard miles from anywhere, and we built this beautiful life together. That is more than luck. That is fate." Maybe she was right. Maybe it was fate that had brought them together that frozen day. Or maybe it was just chance, a random intersection of two paths that happened to lead to something wonderful. Either way, Finnegan was grateful for every moment of it. "I love you," he said, the words as true and necessary as breath. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you lying in that snow, and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Zara replied, turning to kiss him gently. "You gave me everything, Finn. A home, a family, a life more wonderful than I ever imagined possible. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat there as the stars came out, holding each other close, and Finnegan thought about all the twists and turns that had led him to this moment, the hardship and loss that had driven him west, the years of drifting and searching, the storm that had nearly killed them both. All of it, every struggle and setback, had been leading him here, to this woman, this life, this perfect sense of belonging he had finally found. The years continued to pass in their gentle rhythm. Thomas and his wife Sarah had 3 children of their own, making Finnegan and Zara grandparents. There was nothing quite like holding your grandchild for the first time, Finnegan discovered, seeing your own features reflected in a new generation. Mary finished her schooling and did become a teacher, though she eventually moved back to Arizona, unable to stay away from the mountains and the land she loved. She taught in Fort McDowell, inspiring a new generation of children to love learning the way she did. Billy married a rancher's daughter and continued his horse training business, becoming one of the most sought-after trainers in the territory. When Arizona became a state in 1912, Billy was there to celebrate, proud to be part of the new state's future. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's grace and her father's determination. She met a young lawyer from Phoenix and married him in 1915, in a ceremony that brought tears to Finnegan's eyes. Giving away his youngest daughter, he felt the weight of all the years, all the joy and sorrow and love that had brought them to this moment. In 1918, when Finnegan was 60 and Zara was 59, they decided it was time to step back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Thomas had been running most of it for years anyway, and it was time to let the next generation take over fully. They kept the old cabin and a small piece of the original homestead land for themselves, spending their days in quiet contentment. Finnegan still rode out every morning to check on things, unable to break the habit of a lifetime, but he no longer worked dawn to dusk the way he once had. Instead, he spent his afternoons with Zara, reading or talking or just sitting together in comfortable silence. They had been married for 34 years, and sometimes Finnegan looked at her and still saw the young woman he had pulled from the snow, beautiful and brave and full of life, and full of... Other times he saw all the years written on her face, the lines around her eyes and mouth that spoke of laughter and worry, joy and sorrow. She was 59 years old now, her auburn hair streaked with silver, but to him she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. "What are you staring at?" she asked one afternoon, catching him watching her as she worked on some mending. "Just you," he said honestly. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." She smiled, that warm smile that had been his anchor for more than 3 decades. "We are both lucky to have found each other, to have built this life together. Not everyone gets that kind of happiness." "No," he agreed, "not everyone does." They spent their golden years surrounded by family. There were Sunday dinners with children and grandchildren filling the house with noise and laughter. There were holidays celebrated with all the traditions Zara had established over the years. There were quiet evenings, just the two of them talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in the deep knowledge of each other that came from decades of partnership. Finnegan's health began to decline when he was in his late 60s. His body finally showing the wear of years of hard work. But he was content, knowing he had lived a full life, knowing he had built something lasting. When he was 72 years old, he had a mild heart attack that scared them all, but from which he recovered. The doctor warned him to take it easy, and for once in his life, Finnegan listened. He spent more time sitting on the porch of the cabin with Zara, watching the seasons change in the valley they had claimed so long ago. They talked about everything they had been through, all the memories they had made, all the love they had shared. "I do not have any regrets," Finnegan said one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Not a single one. Every choice I made led me to you, and that makes every hardship worth it." "I feel the same way," Zara said, her hand warm in his. "Even that day I almost died in the blizzard. Even that was worth it because it brought us together." They sat in peaceful silence for a while, and then Finnegan said, "When I was young, I used to think happiness was something you chased, something always just out of reach. But I was wrong. Happiness is not something you chase. It is something you build day by day with the person you love. That is very wise, Zara said softly. Well, I have had a lot of years to figure it out, he replied with a smile. Finnegan Irving lived to be 78 years old, passing away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1926, with Zara beside him and his children and grandchildren nearby. He died in the house he had built with his own hands, on the land he had claimed and worked and loved. At his funeral, attended by what seemed like half the state of Arizona, his children spoke about the kind of man he had been. Honest and hard-working, fair and kind, a devoted husband and father who had built something lasting from nothing. But it was Zara's words that brought tears to every eye. Standing beside his grave, her silver hair bright in the Arizona sun, she spoke about the day he had found her in the snow, how he had saved her life and then spent the rest of his giving her everything she could have ever wanted. He was my hero, she said simply, not because he was perfect, but because he showed up every single day and loved me with everything he had. He gave me a home, a family, and a life full of meaning. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I will never regret a single moment we spent together. She lived another 12 years after Finnegan died, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never remarried, saying that she had already had the love of her life and did not need another. When Zara Sinclair Irving died in 1938 at the age of 79, she was buried beside Finnegan in the cemetery outside Fort McDowell. Their children erected a stone that read simply, "Together, forever." The ranch they had built continued for generations, passed down from parent to child, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. But it all started with a cowboy riding through a blizzard and a woman lying unconscious in the snow, two people who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a love that lasted a lifetime. Their great-great-grandchildren still tell the story today, of how their ancestors met during a blizzard in 1884, how he saved her life and she saved his right back, how they built an entire dynasty on nothing but hard work, determination, and a love that refused to quit. It is a story about courage and perseverance, about family and legacy, but most of all, it is a story about love, the kind of love that survives hardship and grows stronger with time, the kind of love that builds homes and raises children and creates a legacy that lasts for generations, the kind of love that starts with a cowboy riding through a storm and a woman waiting to be found and ends with two names carved on a stone, together forever, just as they always wanted to be.